My name is Glenn, and at 54 years old, I thought I understood the meaning of sacrifice. I raised my son alone after losing my wife when he was just 3. We built a life together, brick by brick, dream by dream. When that acceptance letter from West Point arrived, I cried like I hadn't cried since her funeral. My boy was going to be an officer. Everything I'd worked for was finally paying off. Then he said 5 words that destroyed 18 years of my life. I don't want your last name anymore. Before we go any further, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If you've ever sacrificed everything for someone who threw it back in your face, hit that like button right now. And please subscribe, because what I did next changed both our lives forever. Let me tell you how one sentence destroyed everything I built. The accident happened on a Tuesday afternoon in March 17 years ago. Sarah was driving home from the grocery store when a drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly. Dylan had just turned 3 the week before. I remember standing in that hospital corridor, holding a plastic bag with her belongings, wondering how I was supposed to raise a child alone. I was 37, a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant, working regular hours and making decent money. But I knew nothing about being a single parent. Those first months felt like drowning in slow motion. Dylan would wake up crying for his mama every night. I'd hold him in the rocking chair. Sarah used to nurse him in singing songs. I barely remembered feeling completely helpless. The house felt too big and too empty at the same time. Her coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter. Her jacket still hung by the door. I couldn't bring myself to move anything. My mother suggested I hire a nanny. My sister offered to take Dylan for a while so I could grieve properly. But something inside me refused. Sarah and I had made this child together. If she couldn't be here to raise him, then I would do it alone. I owed her that much. I owed him that much. I learned to cook more than boxed macaroni and frozen dinners. I figured out how to wash tiny clothes without turning everything pink. I practiced braiding hair on my sister's daughter before attempting Dylan's baby curls. I joined a single-parent support group where I was the only father. The mothers there taught me about growth spurts and ear infections, and why you should never give a toddler sugar before bedtime. Work became complicated. I couldn't stay late anymore. I couldn't take on weekend projects. My boss was understanding at first, but I could see the frustration building. When a promotion opened up, they gave it to someone else, someone without complications, someone who could dedicate themselves fully to the company. I understood. It still hurt. Money got tighter. Daycare ate up a huge chunk of my salary. I picked up freelance drafting work in the evenings after Dylan went to bed. I'd sit at my desk until 2 in the morning, designing mechanical systems for extra cash, then wake up at 6 to make breakfast and get Dylan ready for preschool. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. But there were good moments too. Beautiful moments. Teaching Dylan to ride his bike in the driveway, running behind him with my hand on the seat until he found his balance. Playing catch in the backyard every evening after dinner, watching his coordination improve week by week. Reading bedtime stories with him curled against my chest, his small hand gripping my shirt. Those moments made everything else worthwhile. Dylan was 7 when he announced he wanted to be a soldier like his grandpa. My father had served in Vietnam, came home with medals he never talked about, and nightmares he drank to forget. He died when I was 25. But Dylan had seen the photos, the uniform in the attic, the flag they'd given us at the funeral. Something about it captured his imagination. I told him about West Point, about how it wasn't just a military academy, but one of the finest educations in the country, about how the best and brightest competed for those slots, about how it would give him opportunities I never had. His eyes went wide with wonder. From that day forward, it became our shared dream. Everything I did after that conversation pointed toward West Point. I researched the admission requirements obsessively. Physical fitness, academic excellence, leadership experience, community service. It wasn't enough to be good. You had to be exceptional. I made a plan. We made a plan together. I enrolled Dylan in the best public school I could afford, which meant moving to a different district. The house was smaller, older, but the schools were rated higher. I took on more freelance work to pay for after-school programs, soccer to build teamwork skills, debate club to develop communication, student council to demonstrate leadership. Every activity was chosen with purpose. The financial strain became crushing. I sold Sarah's car that I'd been keeping in the garage. I cancelled cable television. I stopped eating out entirely, packing lunches for work instead. I wore my clothes until they fell apart, then bought replacements at thrift stores. Every dollar went toward Dylan's future. High school brought new challenges and expenses. Private SAT tutoring that cost $200 an hour. A summer leadership camp at a military base that cost $3,000. Application fees for various programs and competitions. I picked up a second job on weekends doing home repair work for people in the neighborhood. I was exhausted constantly, but I never complained. Not to Dylan. He needed to see strength, not weakness. The applications process for West Point began in Dylan's junior year. It was incredibly complex. You needed congressional nominations, teacher recommendations, physical fitness assessments, medical evaluations, essays explaining why you deserved to serve your country. I helped him craft every document, edit every essay, prepare for every interview. I wrote a personal letter to the admissions board. I described raising Dylan alone after Sarah's death. I explained how we'd worked together toward this goal for over a decade. I talked about his character, his dedication, his unwavering commitment to service. I put my heart into those pages in a way I'd never done for anything else in my life. The waiting period felt eternal. Dylan checked the mail every single day. He'd pace the house, too anxious to focus on homework or friends. I tried to prepare him for disappointment while secretly praying for success. We'd come too far to fail now. I'd sacrificed too much for it to end in rejection. The letter arrived on a Thursday in April. A thick envelope. That was the good sign, people said. Thin meant rejection. Thick meant acceptance. Dylan's hands shook so badly he couldn't open it. I did it for him, my own hands trembling. I pulled out the papers and read the first line. "We are pleased to inform you." Dylan screamed. Actually screamed with joy. Then we both started crying. We held each other in the kitchen, sobbing like we'd won the lottery. In a way we had. I bought a ring that night. Not an expensive one, I couldn't afford expensive. But it was a family ring passed down through my father's side. Gold with a small ruby stone. I'd been saving it for a special occasion. I planned to give it to Dylan on his graduation day from West Point, 4 years in the future. I imagined him in his dress uniform, accepting this symbol of our family's pride. That image kept me going through everything. The months after the acceptance letter were filled with preparation, medical exams, dental work, purchasing the items on the required gear list, filing paperwork, arranging travel for orientation. It was expensive and complicated, but I handled it all. This was the finish line, the culmination of everything we'd worked for. I had it all figured out, every detail planned, every obstacle anticipated. I thought nothing could go wrong now. I was so focused on the destination that I didn't see the disaster approaching from the side. Dylan met Amber in late May, just weeks after graduation from high school. She went to the private academy across town, the one where tuition cost more than my annual salary. They met at some party through mutual friends. He came home that night, talking about this amazing girl, beautiful and smart and sophisticated. I was happy for him. Young love, I thought. A nice distraction before he left for West Point in July. The first time Dylan brought Amber to our house, I felt something twist in my stomach. She was pretty, I'll give her that. Long dark hair, designer clothes, expensive jewelry. She smiled politely and said all the right things. But her eyes kept scanning our small living room, our dated furniture, our worn carpet. I saw her notice the crack in the ceiling I hadn't had money to repair. I saw her glance at the second-hand couch I'd bought when Dylan was 10. Nothing she said was rude, nothing overt. But I felt judged in my own home. Amber talked about her family over dinner. Her parents were divorced. She lived with her mother in a house she described as embarrassingly large. Her mother, Patricia, was a corporate lawyer at one of the biggest firms downtown. Partner level, made 7 figures annually. Amber mentioned this casually like it was nothing, like everyone's mother earned that kind of money. Dylan listened with fascination. He asked questions about her lifestyle, her experiences, her world. She told stories about vacations in Europe, about shopping trips to New York, about country club memberships and private tennis lessons. I watched my son's face and saw something I'd never seen before. Envy. Not the innocent kind children feel over a friend's new toy. This was deeper, darker. A sudden awareness that his life was small compared to hers. After she left, I tried talking to Dylan about it. I suggested that different people have different circumstances, that money doesn't define worth, that we'd built something meaningful together, even without wealth. He nodded along, but I could tell he wasn't really hearing me. His mind was somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't follow. The changes started small. Dylan began spending more time at Amber's house than at home. When I asked about his day, his answers grew shorter. Yes. No. Fine. The conversations we used to have, long discussions about everything and nothing, disappeared. He'd eat dinner quickly and retreat to his room. When I knocked to talk, he'd say he was busy texting Amber or doing something else. Our Sunday evening tradition died first. For years, we'd made a special dinner together every Sunday. Dylan's choice of meal. We'd cook side by side, talking about the week ahead, making plans, sharing thoughts. It was our time. Sacred and protected. The first Sunday he cancelled, he said Amber invited him to a family barbecue at their country club. He'd be back late. I ate alone at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. The second Sunday, he had plans to go to some concert with Amber. The third Sunday, he just said he wasn't hungry. By the fourth Sunday, he stopped making excuses. He simply wasn't there. I stopped setting 2 places at the table. Dylan started talking differently too. He'd mention Amber's mother's house like it was a palace. 6 bedrooms. Pool in the back, 3-car garage, home theater, wine cellar. He'd describe it with this tone of awe, like he'd discovered how the other half lived and couldn't believe what he'd been missing. Each description felt like an implicit criticism of our own home. Our 3-bedroom ranch with the leaky faucet and the grass. I mowed myself. He mentioned Patricia's cars. She had 3. A Mercedes for work, a Range Rover for weekends, a vintage Porsche she kept in climate-controlled storage. Dylan seemed impressed that someone would own a car they barely drove. He started looking at my 12-year-old Toyota with embarrassment. Once when I picked him up from Amber's house, he asked me to park down the street, said he'd walk to meet me. Didn't want her family to see the rust spots on my doors. The comments about money became more frequent. Patricia apparently talked about investments and real estate and market trends over dinner. Dylan would come home repeating things she'd said, trying to sound knowledgeable about subjects he didn't understand. He'd use phrases like portfolio diversification and passive income streams. I'd worked with numbers my entire career. I knew he was just parroting impressive-sounding words without grasping their meaning. One evening I found a brochure on Dylan's desk. Some luxury law firm downtown. Patricia's firm. It advertised starting salaries for associates that made my engineering salary look like minimum wage. The brochure talked about prestige and influence and shaping the future of business. It looked nothing like a military career, nothing like West Point. I felt cold dread settle in my chest. I tried having a conversation about it. Asked Dylan if he was having second thoughts about military service. He got defensive immediately. Said he was just curious about different careers. Said Patricia had been kind enough to share information about various paths. Said I was being paranoid. But I'd raised this boy for 18 years. I knew when he was lying. Or maybe not lying exactly, but not telling the whole truth either. The real warning came at a school event in early June, some awards ceremony for graduating seniors. I sat in the auditorium watching Dylan receive recognition for his academic achievements. Afterward, there was a reception with punch and cookies. I was standing alone, uncomfortable in my one good suit, when a woman approached me. She was tall, impeccably dressed with sharp features and sharper eyes. She extended her hand and introduced herself as Patricia, Amber's mother. I shook her hand and tried to make polite conversation. She cut through the pleasantries like a knife through butter. "So you're the single dad I've heard about?" She said it with this smile that didn't reach her eyes. The one raising Dylan all alone. That must have been challenging. I said yes, it had been challenging, but rewarding. She nodded slowly. Amber speaks very highly of Dylan. Such potential, such ambition. It would be a shame to see it wasted. I asked what she meant. She looked at me like I was slow. Well, military service is admirable, of course, but a young man with Dylan's intelligence could do so much more. Make a real impact. Build real wealth. She paused. Give his own family advantages he never had growing up. The insult was clear, even though she never said anything directly offensive. She was calling me poor, calling the life I'd given Dylan inadequate, suggesting that my son deserved better than what I could provide. I felt my face flush hot. I wanted to defend myself, to explain everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd built from nothing after Sarah died. But I couldn't find the words. Patricia smiled that cold smile again and excused herself. I stood there, feeling whole and worthless at my own son's celebration. That night, I lay awake, wondering if I'd failed Dylan somehow, if all my efforts had been misguided, if the life I'd given him was really as insufficient as Patricia implied. The doubt ate at me, because part of me wondered if she was right. Maybe Dylan could do better. Maybe I'd been selfish, pushing him toward my vision instead of letting him find his own path. Maybe West Point was my dream, not his. The thoughts circled endlessly until dawn. Things got worse after that school event. Dylan's attitude shifted from distant to actively contemptuous. It started with small complaints that grew progressively more cutting. The house was too small, too old, too shabby. Why didn't we have central air conditioning like Amber's house? Why was the carpet so worn? Why didn't I fix the cabinet door that stuck? Each criticism landed like a slap. He started refusing the lunches I packed for him, said they were embarrassing compared to what other people brought. I'd been packing his lunch for 15 years, taking care to include his favorite things, leaving notes of encouragement during exam periods. Suddenly, it was all humiliating. Too homemade, too poor-looking. He wanted money to buy food instead. I gave him $20 from my wallet and watched him pocket it without thanks. The car situation became intolerable. Dylan needed to drive to his various activities and summer commitments before West Point. I'd been letting him use my Toyota when he needed it. That became unacceptable. He complained that it was unreliable, which wasn't true. He complained that it looked cheap, which might have been true, but was irrelevant. He started hinting that I should buy him a proper vehicle, something that wouldn't embarrass him in front of Amber's family and friends. I explained carefully that we didn't have money for a second car, that I'd spent everything on his education, his activities, his future, that the Toyota ran fine and would get him wherever he needed to go. Dylan got angry, said I didn't understand what it was like to have standards, said Amber's mother bought her a BMW for her 16th birthday, said everyone at Amber's level had nice cars, everyone except him. He made it sound like I was deliberately holding him back from his rightful place in society. The conversation about standards stuck with me. I'd raised Dylan to value character over possessions, to understand that worth came from what you did, not what you owned. Somehow that message had been completely overwritten in a few weeks of exposure to Patricia's world. I didn't recognize my own son anymore. Dylan started talking about Patricia's offer to help our family. She apparently felt sorry for our situation and wanted to provide opportunities. At first, this sounded charitable, almost kind. Then Dylan explained what Patricia had in mind. She thought Dylan should consider changing his path, maybe skip West Point, maybe work for her firm after college instead, maybe even attend law school, which she could arrange with her connections, maybe in time even join her family more formally. That last part confused me, until Dylan spelled it out. Patricia had suggested that if Dylan and Amber stayed together long-term, if they eventually married, it would make sense for Dylan to take Patricia's last name. Her name carried weight in legal circles. Her name opened doors. My name, she'd apparently told Dylan, didn't open anything. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. Changing his name, erasing our connection, pretending our family didn't exist. I asked Dylan if he was seriously considering this. He shrugged, said he was keeping his options open, said West Point wasn't the only path to success, said maybe Patricia was right that military service would limit his potential. Dreams change, Dad. You wouldn't understand. Those were his exact words. You wouldn't understand. I tried explaining that Patricia was manipulating him, that she was using wealth and status to make him feel inferior, that she was driving a wedge between us deliberately. Dylan accused me of being jealous, said I couldn't stand seeing him have opportunities I never had, said I wanted to keep him small to make myself feel bigger. The accusations were cruel and completely unfair, but they hurt specifically because I worried there might be a grain of truth buried in the lies. Our first real fight happened on a Thursday evening in late June. Dylan came home after spending the day at Amber's house. I'd made his favorite dinner, trying to recreate some normalcy. He barely looked at the food. I asked him to sit down so we could talk. He sighed dramatically, but complied. I started gently, told him I'd noticed changes in his behavior and attitude, asked if everything was okay with West Point plans, asked if he was having doubts we should discuss. Dylan exploded, said I was always questioning him, always doubting him, always trying to control his choices. I stayed calm and said I just wanted to understand what he was thinking. That's when he said it. The first truly unforgivable thing. Patricia showed me what real success looks like. Not this. He gestured around our kitchen with disgust. Not struggling to pay bills, not driving old cars, not living in a house that's falling apart. Real success, real money, real influence. I felt something crack inside my chest. I reminded him that everything I had went toward him, that I'd worked 2 jobs for years so he could have opportunities, that I'd sacrificed my own career advancement, my own comfort, my own life so he could chase his dreams. Dylan stared at me with cold eyes and said something that made my blood run cold. I never asked you to sacrifice. Those were your choices, your decisions. Don't put that burden on me. In that moment, I saw the full extent of Patricia's influence. She'd poisoned my son against me completely, made him view 18 years of love and dedication as some kind of selfish martyrdom, made him believe I'd somehow trapped him with my sacrifices instead of enabled him with them. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and force him to see reason. Instead, I stood up from the table and walked out of the room. Dylan shouted after me, said I was being dramatic, said I couldn't handle the truth, said I'd always been weak. That word weak echoed in my head. I'd worked myself to exhaustion for 18 years. I'd given up everything. And my son called me weak. I heard his bedroom door slam. I sat alone in my room staring at the wall, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The house felt poisonous after that fight. Dylan avoided me entirely. When we crossed paths, he looked through me like I wasn't there. I tried to initiate conversations that went nowhere. He'd give one-word answers or simply ignore me. The silence was worse than arguing. At least arguing meant he still cared enough to engage. I noticed he was home less and less, spending entire days at Amber's house, sometimes not coming back until late at night. I wanted to set boundaries but didn't know how anymore. He was 18, legally an adult, about to leave for West Point in a few weeks. Except I was increasingly uncertain that was still the plan. I checked his room one afternoon while he was out. I know that was a violation of privacy. I know I shouldn't have. But I needed to understand what was happening. I found printouts about law schools, applications for internships at Patricia's firm, research about legal careers. Nothing about West Point. Nothing about military service. Everything we'd worked toward for a decade was being abandoned, and he hadn't said a word to me about it. The final confrontation happened on the last Tuesday of June. Dylan had been gone all day again. I'd spent the day working and thinking, my mind churning through possibilities and fears. I'd prepared a nice dinner, something simple but good. I wanted one more chance to reach him before everything fell apart completely. He came home around 7 in the evening, walked through the door without greeting me. I called out that dinner was ready. He said he wasn't hungry. I told him I needed to talk to him. He said he was tired. I said it was important. He finally reluctantly came to the kitchen table. We sat across from each other in heavy silence. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say, but the words felt stuck in my throat. Instead, I started talking about memories. Reminded him of learning to ride his bike, playing catch in the backyard, reading stories before bed. The day the West Point acceptance letter came and we cried together. I asked him what happened to us. When did we become strangers? When did I become the enemy? Dylan didn't answer right away. He sat looking at his phone, scrolling through messages, barely acknowledging I was speaking. That casual dismissal hurt more than any insult could have. I asked him to put the phone down, to look at me, to talk to me like I was a person who mattered. He sighed and set it on the table but didn't look up. Finally, I asked the question directly. Are you still planning to go to West Point? Dylan's jaw tightened. He said he'd been thinking about other options, better options, more lucrative paths. I felt my stomach drop, but kept my voice steady. I asked what Patricia had promised him. He got defensive immediately, said it wasn't about promises. It was about being smart enough to recognize opportunity when it appeared. We went in circles for a while. Me trying to understand his thinking, him deflecting and evading. The conversation felt like wrestling smoke. Nothing I said connected. Nothing I asked got honest answers. Finally, I changed tactics. I told him I loved him no matter what path he chose, that I'd support him whether he went to West Point or pursued something else, that my pride wasn't conditional on any specific outcome. I just wanted him to be happy and true to himself. Dylan finally looked at me then. Really looked at me. For a moment I thought I'd gotten through. Thought maybe he'd open up and we could have a real conversation. Then his expression hardened into something cold and decided. He took a breath and said the words that would end everything we'd built together. I don't want your last name anymore. The sentence hung in the air between us. I wasn't sure I'd heard correctly. I asked him to repeat it. He did slower this time. More emphasis. I don't want your last name anymore. Patricia is going to help me. She's filing paperwork for legal adoption. I'll take her name instead. A better name. One that actually means something in the world. Time seemed to stop. I couldn't process what I was hearing. Legal adoption. Taking Patricia's name. Erasing our connection. Making himself her son instead of mine. I asked why. Why would he do this? What had I done to deserve this? Dylan's answer was brutal in its simplicity. Your name doesn't open any doors. Patricia's does. It's not personal. It's practical. I need to think about my future, about my career, about the life I want to build. And that means making smart decisions. This is a smart decision. He continued talking. Said Patricia had it all planned out. He'd still go to college, but not West Point. One of the prestigious universities where Patricia had connections. He'd study pre-law, do an internship at her firm, go to a top law school, eventually make partner, build wealth and influence, have the kind of life he deserved, the kind of life I could never give him. The details washed over me. I stopped listening to the words and just heard the tone. Clinical, calculated, cold. This wasn't my son speaking. This was Patricia's puppet. But the puppet had my son's face and voice, and the puppet was choosing to erase me from his life. Dylan said West Point wasn't important anymore, said military service was a waste of his potential, said he'd only wanted it because he didn't know better options existed. But now he did. Now he understood what real success looked like. And it didn't look like me. It didn't look like anything I represented or could offer. I sat there absorbing blow after blow, each word another betrayal, each sentence another knife wound. I thought about Sarah, about what she would say if she could see this moment, about whether she'd blame me for failing our son, about how I'd lost her to an accident and was now losing him to something worse. Dylan stood up from the table, said he'd be moving into Patricia's house next week, said the legal paperwork would take a few months, but it was just a formality, said he hoped I'd understand this wasn't about me. It was about him taking control of his future, making his own choices, becoming his own man. The irony of that last part, becoming his own man, by letting Patricia puppet him, seemed completely lost. He turned to walk away. I finally found my voice, asked if this was really what he wanted, if he'd thought it through completely, if he understood what he was throwing away. Dylan stopped at the doorway, but didn't turn around. He said yes. He'd thought about it carefully. This was the right decision. Then he went to his room and closed the door. I sat at that kitchen table for hours, didn't move, didn't eat, didn't do anything except exist in the wreckage of my life. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made, every extra shift worked, every opportunity I'd passed up, every dollar spent on Dylan's future. All of it meaningless now, all of it thrown back in my face like garbage. Around midnight, something shifted inside me. The hurt began hardening into something else, something colder and more dangerous. Dylan wanted to pretend I didn't matter, wanted to erase our connection like it meant nothing, wanted to trade me in for a better model. Fine. But he seemed to have forgotten something crucial. Everything he had, everything he was about to lose, I'd built for him. And what I built, I could destroy. I went to my office and turned on my computer, pulled up files I'd been maintaining for years. West Point admission documents, financial records, letters of recommendation, all the pieces that had come together to create Dylan's acceptance, all the pieces that existed because of me. I sat staring at the screen, my finger hovering over the mouse, making a decision that would change both our lives forever. If Dylan didn't want my name, then he didn't get my work either. He didn't get the future I'd purchased with 18 years of my life. Let him build his own path. Let Patricia give him everything she promised. Let's see how far he gets without me. I opened my email and began typing. Dear West Point Admissions Board, I am writing to inform you of changed circumstances regarding my son's acceptance. I didn't rush the email. I wrote it carefully, precisely with the same attention to detail I'd given the recommendation letter that helped get Dylan accepted in the first place. I explained that I was his father and sole parent, that I'd been the primary supporter and co-signer on all his application materials, that circumstances in our family had fundamentally changed, that Dylan was pursuing a different path, now one that didn't align with the values of military service, that I was withdrawing my endorsement and support, that I could no longer vouch for his character or commitment. I reread it 3 times, changed a few words, made it sound regretful but firm, made it clear this wasn't a rash decision, but a necessary one based on new information about my son's priorities and integrity. I attached documentation showing my role in the application process, my letters of support, my financial commitments, everything that proved how essential I'd been to his acceptance. The send button glowed on my screen. My cursor hovered over it. Part of me knew this was irreversible, that once I sent this email there would be no going back. Dylan's acceptance would be reviewed and almost certainly revoked. West Point doesn't accept cadets whose own parents withdraw support. The institution is built on honor and family values. A fractured family situation raises questions about character and stability. I thought about Dylan upstairs in his room, probably texting Amber, probably making plans with Patricia, probably not giving me a single thought. He'd made his choice. Now I was making mine. I clicked send. The email disappeared from my screen. Delivered. Done. Irreversible. Next came the financial arrangements. I'd set up a college fund for Dylan when he was born. Sarah and I started it together. After she died, I'd continued contributing every month. $50 here, $50 Tolton, $100 there. Whatever I could spare after bills and necessities. Over 18 years, it had grown to almost $23,000. Not enough for 4 years at a private university, but enough to make a difference. The account was in my name, with Dylan as beneficiary. I was the only one who could access it. I logged into the bank website, transferred the entire balance to my personal checking account. The beneficiary designation meant nothing if I withdrew the funds before he turned 21. It was my money, my savings, built with my sacrifices. If Dylan wanted Patricia's name and Patricia's life, he could use Patricia's money too. Next was the health insurance. Dylan was on my policy through work. I called the HR hotline and filed paperwork to remove him effective immediately. He was 18, an adult, moving out by his own choice. He didn't need to be my dependent anymore. Let him figure out his own coverage. Let Patricia add him to whatever platinum plan she had. I pulled out the file folder where I kept important documents, found Dylan's birth certificate, his social security card, his passport, all the official papers that made him legally mine. I'd guarded these carefully for 18 years. Now I put them in an envelope with his name on it, left it on the kitchen table. He'd need them for Patricia's adoption paperwork. Might as well make it easy. There were other things too. Smaller, but still significant. I'd promised a colleague's son I'd recommend Dylan for an internship at an engineering firm next summer. I sent an email withdrawing the recommendation. Said Dylan was pursuing a different direction and wouldn't be interested. I had season tickets to the local baseball team's games. Dylan and I went together every year. I offered his ticket to a friend instead. Said I needed a new tradition. I went through my phone and deleted the photos. Not all of them. I kept the ones with Sarah. Kept the early childhood ones. But the recent pictures, the ones of teenage Dylan, I removed them. If he wanted to erase our connection, I'd help him along. I'd make it easier for both of us. By 3 in the morning, I'd systematically dismantled every piece of support I'd built for Dylan's future. The college fund was gone. The insurance was cancelled. The recommendations were withdrawn. The connections I'd cultivated for his benefit were severed. 18 years of work undone in a few hours. It felt strangely liberating. Like setting down a weight I'd been carrying so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. I finally went to bed as the sun started rising. Fell asleep instantly. The deep, dreamless sleep of someone who'd made a terrible decision and didn't regret it at all. I woke up around noon. The house was quiet. Dylan's door was closed. I made coffee and sat in the kitchen wondering how long it would take for the consequences to hit. West Point would need to review the information I'd sent. That might take a few days, maybe a week. I had time to prepare for Dylan's reaction. The call came faster than I expected. 3 days later, Saturday morning, I was doing yard work when Dylan burst out of the house phone in hand, face completely white. He looked terrified, confused, like his world had just collapsed. "Dad." His voice shook. "What did you do?" I set down the rake I'd been using, looked at him calmly. Asked what he meant. West Point. They sent me an email. They're reviewing my acceptance. They said there's been new information about my family situation. They said you contacted them. What did you tell them? I wiped sweat from my forehead. Said I told them the truth. That circumstances had changed. That he was pursuing a different path now. That I couldn't continue supporting an application based on plans he no longer intended to follow. Dylan's face went from white to red. He started yelling, said I had no right, said I'd ruined everything, said I'd destroyed his future. I stayed calm, reminded him that he'd said he didn't want West Point anymore, that he was taking Patricia's path instead, that military service was beneath him now. He stuttered something about keeping options open. I said he'd made his choice very clear. Now he had to live with it. He begged then. Actually begged. Said he'd changed his mind. Said he was confused. Said he wanted to fix this. Wanted me to call West Point and explain there'd been a misunderstanding. I asked if he'd told Patricia yet about changing his mind. If he'd told Amber he wanted to keep his own name after all. The silence told me everything. He hadn't. He wanted West Point as a backup plan while still keeping Patricia's promises. He wanted everything without committing to anything. I said no. Said what's done is done. Said if he wanted West Point, he should have thought about that before announcing he was erasing me from his life. Dylan tried arguing, tried reasoning, finally tried threatening. Said he'd tell West Point I was lying, that I was bitter about his success, that I was trying to sabotage him. I suggested he try that approach, told him I had documentation of everything, emails, text messages, his own words about not wanting my name. Good luck explaining that to an institution built on honor and integrity. Dylan stormed back into the house. I heard him on the phone immediately, calling someone. Probably Patricia. Probably Amber. Probably anyone who might fix this disaster. I went back to raking leaves. The yard needed work. Might as well focus on something I could actually control. Over the next few hours, I heard Dylan making call after call. His voice alternated between pleading and angry. None of it would help. West Point had strict policies. Once a parent withdrew support, especially citing character concerns. The acceptance was essentially finished. They might go through the formality of a review, but the outcome was predetermined. Dylan just didn't understand that yet. Evening came. Dylan emerged from his room, eyes red like he'd been crying. He sat down across from me in the living room, asked in a small voice if I'd really let his acceptance die, if I'd really destroy his future over one mistake. One thing he'd said in anger. I looked at him carefully, said it wasn't one thing. It was weeks of contempt, weeks of insults, weeks of making me feel worthless while accepting everything I provided. Said he'd made his values clear. Money mattered more than family. Status mattered more than integrity. Patricia's name mattered more than mine. So now he could live with those values fully. See how well they served him. Dylan said he was sorry. Said he'd been stupid. Said he'd let Patricia get in his head. Said he'd fix things with her. End things with Amber. Come back home fully. Be the son I deserved. All of it sounded hollow, scripted, like he'd rehearsed it during those phone calls. I didn't believe a word. I asked him directly. If I called West Point right now and fixed this, would he still move into Patricia's house next week? Would he still pursue the adoption? Would he still take her name? Dylan hesitated. Just for a second. But that second told me everything. He wanted both. Wanted West Point as security, while keeping Patricia's promises as backup. He wasn't choosing me. He was hedging his bets. I said no. Said I wouldn't fix it. Said the email I sent was honest and accurate. Said he'd made his decision and now had to accept the consequences. Dylan started crying. Real tears this time. Said I was destroying him. Said I was cruel. Said he'd never forgive me. I said that was fine. He'd already made clear he didn't want to be my son anyway. Might as well make it mutual. He went back to his room. I heard things breaking, heard him shouting, heard more phone calls. None of it changed anything. The damage was done. Permanent and complete. I sat in my chair, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and grief. I'd protected myself, but I'd lost my son in the process. Or maybe I'd lost him weeks ago and was only now admitting it. The official letter from West Point arrived on Tuesday. Dylan brought it to me, hands shaking, face expressionless. He didn't need to open it. We both knew what it said. But he opened it anyway. Read it out loud in a flat voice. Due to changed circumstances and concerns raised about family support and applicant commitment, we regret to inform you that your acceptance to the United States Military Academy at West Point has been withdrawn. He set the letter down on the table between us, looked at me with empty eyes, said he hoped I was happy, said I'd gotten what I wanted, destroyed everything he'd worked for. I didn't argue. There was no point. The truth was more complicated than he understood. I wasn't happy. I wasn't satisfied. I was just done. Done fighting. Done sacrificing. Done being treated like I didn't matter. Dylan called Patricia that afternoon. I heard him explaining the situation. Heard him ask if her offers still stood. Heard a long pause. Then I heard his voice change. Become smaller. Uncertain. He asked her to repeat what she'd said. Another pause. Then he said, "Okay," quietly, and ended the call. He came out of his room looking destroyed. I asked what Patricia had said. He didn't want to tell me at first. Finally, he admitted the truth. Patricia had said she never actually promised anything concrete. Said she'd mentioned possibilities, but made no commitments. Said Dylan must have misunderstood. Said with his West Point acceptance gone, he wasn't as interesting a prospect anymore. Said she needed to focus on Amber's future right now. Said maybe they'd revisit the conversation later. Much later. Probably never. I'd known this would happen. Patricia never intended to follow through. She'd used Dylan as a toy, a way to prove she could steal someone's son just because she was wealthy and powerful. Now that the game was over, she had no use for him. Dylan was learning an expensive lesson about trusting people who valued status over substance. Amber broke up with him the next day, by text message. Didn't even have the decency to call. The text said she thought they wanted different things, that she needed space, that it wasn't working anymore. Dylan showed it to me, I think, wanting sympathy. I had none to offer. She'd been part of the poison, part of what corrupted him. Good riddance. For 2 weeks, Dylan and I lived in the same house as strangers. We didn't speak except when absolutely necessary. He stayed in his room most of the time. I heard him on his computer, presumably looking at college options, now that West Point was gone. I didn't ask, didn't offer help. He'd wanted independence. He had it now. He got a job at a fast food restaurant. Came home smelling like fryer grease. I'd see him counting his tips at the kitchen table, this defeated look on his face. He was making maybe $9 an hour, working 40 hours a week, saving for a future that suddenly looked much harder and further away. I felt no satisfaction in his struggle, but I felt no pity either. This was reality. This was what life looked like without the cushion I'd provided. One evening, about a month after everything fell apart, Dylan knocked on my office door, asked if we could talk. Really, talk. I said fine. We sat in the living room, the same spots where we'd had the conversation that destroyed everything. But this felt different. Dylan looked different. Tired. Older. Less certain of himself. He didn't apologize at first, just talked. Said he'd been thinking a lot. Said he understood now what Patricia had done. How she'd manipulated him. Made him think wealth and status were the only things that mattered. Made him ashamed of where he came from. Made him cruel to the person who'd loved him most. He said he'd been an idiot. Blinded by things that weren't real. Seduced by promises that were never meant to be kept. He said he wasn't asking me to fix West Point. He knew that was gone forever. Knew I couldn't repair it even if I wanted to. Said he'd thrown away an opportunity that most people would kill for. Said he deserved to lose it. But he wanted me to know he understood now. Understood what he'd lost. Not just West Point. Me. Our relationship. 18 years of trust and love that he'd destroyed in a few weeks of stupidity. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I asked what he planned to do now. He said he'd been researching community colleges, could enroll in January, study general education while figuring out a major, work full-time to pay for it, maybe transfer to a 4-year university eventually, build a path forward step by step, slowly, the hard way, the way most people had to do it. I asked if he'd learned anything from all this. He thought for a long moment, then said yes. He'd learned that character matters more than status, that love is worth more than money, that the people who actually care about you are rare and precious, that his father had given him everything and he'd been too blind to see it, that by the time he figured it out, it was too late to fix. I let that hang in the air between us. Then I told him something. Said I wasn't going to restore his West Point acceptance. That ship had sailed. But I wasn't going to abandon him either. I'd help with community college tuition, not pay for all of it. He needed to work and contribute. But I'd help. On one condition. He had to earn it. Maintain good grades. Work consistently. Prove he was serious about rebuilding his life. Prove he'd learned something from this disaster. Dylan's eyes filled with tears. He said he didn't deserve my help, that I should hate him, that he'd hate himself in my position. I said hate was exhausting. Said I'd spent enough energy on anger. Said he was still my son, even if he'd tried to erase that fact. Said family wasn't something you could just throw away, though he'd certainly tried. Said maybe this was a chance for both of us to start over. Build something more honest, more real, based on who we actually were instead of who we'd pretended to be. He asked if I'd ever forgive him. I said I didn't know. Said forgiveness wasn't a switch you flip. It was a process. A long, slow, difficult process. Said maybe we'd get there eventually, or maybe we wouldn't. But either way, I wasn't going to let him destroy his entire future. I'd made my point, taught my lesson. Now it was time to move forward. Dylan thanked me, not with big dramatic words, just quietly, sincerely. Then he went to his room. I sat there thinking about Sarah, about what she'd think of how I'd handled this, about whether I'd been too harsh or not harsh enough, about whether destroying Dylan's dreams had been justice or just revenge. I still don't know the answer to that. Maybe I never will. The months that followed were slow and strange. Dylan enrolled in community college in January, took a full course load while working 30 hours a week. I'd see him at the kitchen table late at night working on assignments after his shift, struggling to stay awake. He never complained, never asked for more help than we'd agreed on. Just put his head down and worked. His grades came back after the first semester. All A's and B's. He showed me the transcript with shy pride. I told him I was proud of him. It felt good to say those words again, to mean them. We weren't fixed. We weren't back to normal. But we were building something new, something that felt more solid than before, built on reality instead of fantasy. Dylan made new friends at school. Different kinds of people than Amber's crowd. Kids who worked full-time and took classes part-time. Single parents going back to school. Veterans using their benefits. People who understood struggle. Who valued education because they'd had to fight for it. He seemed more comfortable with them than he'd ever been at Amber's country club. We started having Sunday dinners again. Not every week, but sometimes. We'd cook together like we used to. Talk about regular things. School, work, the news, small stuff. Not the deep conversations we'd had before. Those were gone, buried under too much pain. But these surface-level talks felt healing in their own way. Proof we could exist in the same space without destroying each other. I ran into Patricia once about 6 months after everything fell apart, at a grocery store. She looked at me with this smug expression, asked how Dylan was doing. I said he was fine, working hard, building his future. She said something sarcastic about community college. I looked her in the eye and said at least he was doing it honestly, with people who actually cared about him, not being used as a toy by someone with too much money and not enough character. Her face went hard. She walked away without another word. I felt satisfaction then, real satisfaction, not at Dylan's suffering, at Patricia's loss. She'd tried to break my family and failed. We were broken but not destroyed, damaged but healing. That felt like a win. Dylan eventually told me what happened with Amber. She'd called him a few months after the breakup, asked if he wanted to get coffee. He'd gone curious. She'd apologized, said her mother had pushed her to date Dylan as some kind of project, some way to prove their superiority over regular people. Amber said she genuinely liked him at first, but then her mother got involved and ruined it. She'd felt terrible watching Patricia manipulate him, but hadn't been strong enough to stop it. Dylan thanked her for the apology, but said he didn't want to restart anything. That chapter was closed. She understood. Time moved forward. Dylan completed 2 years at community college, applied to state universities for transfer, got accepted to 3 of them, chose one with a good business program. Not law school, not military service. Something in between. Something that was actually his choice. He moved into a dorm, started the next phase of his education. I helped him pack, drove him to campus. We didn't cry this time, just shook hands. He thanked me again. I told him to make it count. He said he would. I think about that night a lot. The night I sent the email. The night I decided to destroy Dylan's future, to teach him a lesson. I still don't know if I was right. Part of me thinks I was justified, that Dylan needed to hit rock bottom to understand what he'd taken for granted, that the pain was necessary for growth. Part of me thinks I was cruel, that I used my power to hurt my own child, that there must have been a better way. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I wasn't completely right. I wasn't completely wrong. I was a hurt father who made a devastating decision in a moment of betrayal. The consequences were severe for both of us, but we both survived. We both learned. We both changed. Dylan is 22 now, doing well at university, has a part-time job at a bank, talks about maybe getting an MBA eventually, has a girlfriend who works as a nurse. Good person, kind, down to earth. The kind of person who makes him better instead of worse. He brings her to Sunday dinners sometimes. I like her. Our relationship is different now. Not what it was before. Can never be what it was before. Too much damage. Too many scars. But it's real. It's honest. It's built on clear understanding of who we both are. I'm not the perfect father who sacrifices everything. He's not the perfect son who appreciates everything. We're just two people who hurt each other badly and chose to rebuild anyway. Sometimes Dylan asks if I regret what I did, if I wish I'd handled it differently. I tell him the truth. Yes and no. Yes, I regret the pain. No, I don't regret the lesson. He needed to understand that actions have consequences, that words matter, that you can't treat people like garbage and expect them to keep supporting you, that family is precious and fragile and can be destroyed if you're not careful. He says he's grateful for it now. Says hitting rock bottom made him a better person. Made him appreciate things he'd taken for granted. Made him understand the difference between what matters and what doesn't. Says he would have been miserable on Patricia's path, would have become someone he hated. Says the pain was worth it if it saved him from that future. I don't know if I believe that. Feels like something people tell themselves to make sense of suffering. But maybe he's right. Maybe destroying his West Point dream saved him from something worse. Maybe the detour was the actual path all along. Maybe everything happened exactly the way it needed to happen. What I do know is this. Sometimes the hardest lesson is the one that saves them. Sometimes love means letting someone fall. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let consequences happen. I didn't just drop his future that night. I gave him a chance to build his own. On his terms, with his choices, for his reasons. He's building it now. Slowly, imperfectly, but honestly. And maybe that's better than the perfect life I tried to hand him. Maybe that's the real gift, not the opportunities I provided, but the opportunity I took away. The chance to fail, the chance to struggle, the chance to find out who he really was when everything else was stripped away. I think about Sarah sometimes. Wonder what she'd say about all this. Wonder if she'd be proud or ashamed. Wonder if she'd think I did the right thing or made everything worse. I'll never know. But I like to think she'd understand. That she'd see I did what I thought was necessary. That I loved our son enough to let him hate me. That I protected him by pushing him away. The ring I bought for his graduation from West Point sits in my drawer. He'll never have that graduation, never wear that uniform, never receive that ring. But maybe someday when he graduates from business school or gets married or has a child of his own, I'll give it to him anyway, as a reminder of where we started, where we fell, and how we climbed back up. What would you do if someone you loved betrayed everything you built for them? How would you respond? Would you save them from consequences or let them fall? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe for more real stories about family betrayal and redemption. Share this with someone who needs to hear that sometimes loving someone means letting them fail. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there facing their own impossible decision. May you find the strength to do what's right, even when right feels wrong.